Well, we've heard Tessa talk about the housing crisis this morning. I think my view is that there is a housing crisis, but there's also a crisis of commercial space that the city focuses. And the problem is that those two areas of demand are increasingly competing for the same space, the same pieces of central London. And if we are to respond to that, I think we've got to really up our game in thinking about the scale of development that we can deliver in central London to accommodate both sets of requirements. This is not a local problem, this is a global problem. We're seeing the millennial generations coming back into London, not into major cities, wanting to live, work and play centrally. They're the people placing the demand on that space, and yet our cities are designed around downtowns, suburbs, and transport connections between the two. So we really need to start rethinking the way in which those relationships work. And you can see from my slide here that we are somewhat perhaps behind the pace. I'm not convinced we are behind the pace, but there is certainly a scale of thinking going on across the globe at the moment, which is really seeking to deliver development on a massive, massive quantum. The one in the middle is the one I might point out as being closest to us in Madrid, where an area of about 350 hectares, much of it already occupied, is being thought about for redevelopment on the back of a high-speed rail station investment for the transformation of central Madrid for both housing and a new commercial district being accommodated in the same location. We've got some good experience here in London, and I was lucky enough to work for the ODA, which Tessa Zhao was praising early on. But I think the ODA was particularly successful because it has a unique set of events within which it operated. It had actually a huge amount of public money to invest. It had a very short time scale which couldn't be moved. And it had a sense of ambition and public support that enabled it to move at pace. And the result was the concertining of what would have been a 25-year development period for Stratford City into 7 years. But I don't think we've got that opportunity every day of the week. And most developments of the kind of scale that I'm talking about take many, many decades to deliver and come to fruition. And this chart, courtesy of Deloitte, shows us the kind of economic cycles that many of London's major developments have had to pass through before they've really started to see the full build-out of their true potential. Now, what we do know is the way in which the public sector can help smooth the ride for the development industry is through the investment of infrastructure. And when you map infrastructure decisions to this chart, you can start to see that when key decisions were made about funding key pieces of infrastructure, they had a positive effect on confidence, a positive effect on investment, and you started to see values rise, which facilitated the implementation of those development schemes, riding out, if you like, of economic downturns. So how can we capitalize in this age of fiscal frugality in the public sector and trying to follow this kind of pattern through infrastructure investment to encourage the private sector to deliver major development over time? Well, I think one thing we witness is to look at the way in which the industry responds to those kinds of investment decisions. And when you look back in time, you can see that when investment decisions around stations, for example, are made, or even around the Olympics are made, you get an immediate impact on the land outside the Red Line very, very early on in the development process. In fact, a long time before construction is complete, usually, of that piece of kit. The place, perhaps, where it was most obvious was the Olympic Park, where you saw a huge amount of development taking place on its edge a long time before the Olympic Park or Stratford City was complete. And that was driven by investor confidence that change was coming and change was going to happen. And I think we see that the same effects happening around some of the investments in London's major stations, and we're seeing it happening now around Crossrail. And yet the challenge is that when we appraise major infrastructure, traditionally, we tend not to take into account those wider effects to any great degree. And when you think about the effects that they can deliver in terms of welfare savings, tax benefits, additional homes that might be delivered outside the Red Line as well as inside the Red Line, additional commercial space and value uplift, that can be delivered, I think there's a strong case to bring together that wider economic benefit equation together with the appraisals up front to join infrastructure investment and development together in the way in which we decide where we want to invest and the way in which we decide which investors we want to bring into the London market. Crossrail, I think, has pointed effectively in the right direction by seeking in an early way to do this. But I think there's an opportunity to perhaps now to upscale our ambition. And when Jeremy was speaking earlier, I think you got the sense that the 2050 vision, which I think incidentally is unique across the globe and is the envy of many mayors, certainly that I've been working with elsewhere, really sets out the extent to which there is an opportunity in London, if only we could capitalise on that link between infrastructure and development in the way in which we go about delivering it. So how do we do that? When you ask any investor whether they want to invest in a new infrastructure project anywhere in the globe, the first thing they will tell you is, do you have a good governance structure in place that can guarantee me that that investment is going to be safe and that it's going to realise the kind of returns that we're looking for, both through infrastructure and possibly through land. In order to do that in Britain, we can look backwards. When you can think about the old ways in which we used to deliver these things, they really are quite relevant to some of our considerations today. I'd point you in this slide towards the Metroland poster, which was effectively a railway estates development organisation specifically set up around the Metropolitan Railway in order to deliver the housing benefits that might be derived from new stations along that line. Wouldn't that be an interesting concept to take into the current thinking of the way in which London is developing its own stations? But perhaps that ambition doesn't go far enough, and we also need to look at what else is happening across the globe. And this image is of the Shinjuku station in Tokyo, where they really do think big. I think it's about 200 different entrances to that station have been developed, all of which give you a front door to your new commercial plot, which it is then delivered by what's called the Tokyu Corporation, which is a pseudo-public, pseudo-private organisation deliberately charged with capitalising on major infrastructure investment of this kind of scale. I think when Tessa talks about Homes for Londoners agencies being set up, perhaps we need to think about the way in which such an agency might bring together a new ambition of thinking between the private and the public sector to deliver this kind of scale of development for London.